Noah, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I wanted to start off talking about kids. And you talk about a natural wisdom and a compassion that's in all of us and all of humanity. How do we encourage that early on in our children?
I don't know if I have a good answer. I feel like in some ways it's a simple, we just do encourage it. And by teaching them and by showing them that some of their urges, some of their impulses, this survival instinct that hates pain, that children have, that adults have, that we all have, by normalizing that, of saying, of course you don't like to be uncomfortable, you don't like to not get your way. Of course you want pleasure, that you want sugar, you want the toy, you want, the attention. Mm-hmm. And normalizing that and saying, we're all like this. This is just what it's like to, we want pleasure, we don't want pain. But by educating them and saying, but a life lived on trying to satisfy every desire that you have will not make you happy. Mm. A life lived on trying to get rid of discomfort all of the time. Of course, as parents, we want to protect you. We want to make you as comfortable as possible. We also understand that there's going to be certain pains that we're not going to be able to protect you from. You're going to fight with your siblings. You're going to get teased at school. All of those things, pain is inevitable. So normalizing that, this is, of course, the Buddhist view, which is normalizing that, pain is inevitable and unescapable, but suffering is when we meet that pain with hatred. And so this is a pretty simple philosophy that you can teach kids at a fairly young age. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, it's thought that around 7 years old that they can start to understand that compassion for pain is much more wise than hatred of pain. Mm-hmm. And that some level of renunciation, of not satisfying every desire or every craving, of understanding that, for my daughter, every time we go to the store, you don't get to buy a toy. Mm-hmm. And even though, there's that tantrum and that, I really want it. Why can't I have what I want? Mm-hmm. And being able to normalize, we can't just do what we want all of the time.
Mm-hmm. When you said that, it reminded me of a conversation I had with my youngest this morning. And when I called him, he told me, Dad, Granddaddy Tom bought me that toy you wouldn't buy me the other day. Mm-hmm. So we probably need to develop some type of training course for grandparents.
Yeah, I think grandparents basically feel that they get a free pass.
Right, exactly.
They get to do whatever they want, they think.
Right. I listened to one of your talks from a couple of years ago where you compared Buddhism to swimming. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you would comment on that.
I don't completely remember the context of the swimming analogy and the talk that you're referring to. But I often do refer to the fact that we are speaking, I'm teaching Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And I'm teaching about recovery. I'm talking about all of this stuff. But talking about meditation, talking about prayer, talking about being of service is a little bit like talking about swimming. And that you can't actually learn to swim through a lecture. You can maybe learn move your arms like this, and but you have to get in the water. You actually have to do it. It's a practice, it's an experience. And until you are actually in the water, you can't say I know how to swim because I learned it in a book. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with meditation, with any sort of spiritual awakening process. You can't actually learn it from a book. You have to sit down and close your eyes. You have to take the actions. You have to go into that internal world. And then you learn the meditative awakening process, much like getting in the pool. Mm-hmm. We have to take that action, we have to do that practice, and then we have to swim our laps. Now that we know how to swim, now that we know how to meditate, now that we know, what our tools for recovery are, knowing them, maybe that's faith without works, dead. You can believe in all of this stuff, but if you don't get in the pool and swim your laps every day, you're going to not develop the necessary skill and the necessary kind of ongoing conditioning. I know you're a runner, right? Mm-hmm. I know how to run. But I don't actually run, right? So I'm not in the kind of shape that you're in. So it's about actually putting that into action as a practice, as a process, as a discipline in our lives.
I thought, yesterday in your talk, you talked about the first step is set the intention. And I think for so many people, whether it's a Dharma practice or whether it's running or swimming, I think sometimes they don't understand how important just setting the intention is, as a conscious first step. I don't know if you want to speak on.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's not much more to say about it other than, and some of it comes to our priorities and our views. Where do I want to go? If I want to go north, I better be pointed north, right? If I want to be in really good shape, I better run every day and exercise every day. If I want to have spiritual health and well-being, I better practice every day, right? So and I do want it, and this is the part where I think is a little tricky or something, where everybody wants to be happy. But are we actually seeking happiness in the right place? Are we actually taking the actions that will lead to happiness? I mean, I sort of feel like in this world, everybody wants to be happy, but they have this very confused idea that if they make enough money, they'll be happy. If they get enough attention, they'll be happy. If they have enough pleasure, sense pleasures, they'll be happy. And I think on some level, we all know that that's not true. And of course, there's so many examples of people who have all of the money and have all of the pleasure and have gotten all of the success, the fame, whatever they thought was going to make them happy, and they're miserable, right? They're coming to treatment, They're addicts because there isn't enough money to make anybody happy. That craving is repetitive and is an ongoing cycle. So I want to be happy. I know it's not going to come from material success. I know it's not going to come from sense pleasures. I know, for me, it's an internal job. It's about how I'm relating to my own mind. So my intention is to know the nature of my mind, to know the cravings, the aversions, and to develop compassion towards pain in my life. So my intention is happiness, and then what are the tools and the practices, the discipline, the swimming, the running, whatever, that is necessary to get to true ease and happiness and well-being. Because everybody has the intention to be happy. Across the board. But not everybody is acting in a way that will ever lead to happiness. And I really feel that way. I feel like people are saying, I want to be happy, but happiness is north, but I'm spending my whole life chasing south, right? I want to be happy, but I'm spending my whole life doing things, drinking, using, accumulating, hoarding, clinging, a bunch of stuff that's not going to ever make me happy. Some of it is education. I mean, I think a lot of people in this world actually just have never been given the appropriate map to happiness. We're in this sort of capitalist, materialist society that says money is happiness, success is happiness. It's not that hard to sit back and say, we know that's not true. If you really have happiness, if you've done the appropriate things, you've developed compassion, non-attachment, loving kindness, generosity, if you're of service, then having a successful career is wonderful. But looking to your successful career for your happiness, misery. Never works. It's much more of an inside job from Buddhist perspective.
The first time I went to Dave Smith's, one of his Sunday night open meetings, and we did the first meditation, it was so hard to quiet the mind. And, Dave has a really gentle way of teaching you, I think, or leading you down that, when your mind, you start to kind of wander, you just honor that thought, acknowledge that thought, but then come back. Because I think in folks that we've worked with and talked with, they feel like they're a failure that first few times that they want to sit and try to meditate. So when you were incarcerated and you've got a lot of time, so how, so you can probably be, my thought would be that you can be somewhat maybe more successful because you have a lot of time. But what do you say to young people who have got all these pressures and they're trying to get sober or get clean or stay sober or stay clean. And they've got all these competing pressures of jobs and housing and maybe families. What are some techniques that you found effective in trying to help them quiet and kind of get centered?
Well, the first thing, and I mean this in no way as a criticism to you or anyone else, but the first thing is that I believe actually quieting the mind is a misconception. That it's not actually about having a quiet mind. And I think that that's why a lot of people don't meditate, is because they say, I can't quiet my mind. And so then they just give up. The core practice, and as Dave Smith, who's an awesome, wonderful teacher, was trying to teach you, right, gives the instruction, which is that your mind is going to continue to do what it's going to do. It's going to plan, it's going to remember, it's going to judge, it's going to criticize, it's going to, maybe it's chaotic, maybe at sometimes your mind will be calm and somewhat spacious, but the mind itself is not so dissimilar than the lungs or the heart. It's one of the autonomic biological systems in the body. The lungs breathe all by themselves. We all understand that, right? You're not breathing. Your body breathes all by itself. But we don't sit around kind of taking it personal of like, oh yes, but I think it's a good analogy too, because you can have some influence over your breath. You can choose to take a deep breath. You can choose to hold your breath for a couple minutes maybe till you pass out, and then your body will keep breathing. But you can't stop your breath any more than you can stop your mind. The mind thinks. That's what this organ, this brain, is wired to do. And it's wired to do it in a way that will help us survive, looking out for danger. Am I safe? Right? What's the next task? What's the next plan that I need to do? Remembering the past, what has been unsafe, what has caused me pain in the past, right? And so that's just what it's the brain's job is to think. So meditation isn't like, I'm going to turn off I'm going to quiet that. First task is to learn to ignore it, to not take it so personally. You don't have to stop thinking. Let those thoughts. And so when I'm working with addicts, when I'm working in the jails, when I'm working wherever I am, first task, ignore your mind. Pay attention to the physical sensations of the breath, of the body, of the present time embodied experience. From that place, and then you get better and better at having some choice over how you relate to your mind. I like to sometimes phrase this as breaking our addiction to thinking. Thinking is wonderful, it is necessary, but when you're addicted to it, your life can be really difficult. When you're taking everything personal all of the time and you lose the choice over how you relate to your mind, life can be so stressful. With meditation, you can have some level of renunciation, not total abstinence. Maybe it's more of a harm reduction recovery model, breaking the addiction to being completely identified with the mind, being able to ignore it, being able to hang out in the physical, like when you run. Right? One of the reasons why people love exercise, of course, physically it feels good, but also when you're that concentrated from running, from swimming, from whatever exercise you're doing, you have that temporary relief because you're so focused in the body that the mind either gets quiet or at least distant. Right? You're ignoring it for sometimes. Or sometimes, you're still very identified with the mind, but you're so focused in the body that it's not so. Maybe again, some good thoughts, some good work done. So I think that that's the number one thing that again, it comes down to educating people and saying, it's not about stopping your mind. You don't have to stop your mind.
No, I wanted to ask you, you made a comment in another presentation that I saw where you talked about Buddhism as an action. And I would guess that you would view recovery as an action.
Absolutely. And at this point, I'm not really viewing Buddhism and recovery as very separate. Actually, quite the same thing. For me, of course, all of these years of using Buddhism as my recovery path, and that all of it is an action. That it's not philosophy. That the first truth around suffering and seeing the suffering, the dissatisfaction, the stress in our life, it's not a philosophical, intellectual understanding of suffering. It's a practice of turning towards it, of breaking any denial about it. The second truth around seeing craving, it's not a philosophy, it's not an idea, it's the experience of how does craving arise in my body? What kind of sensations, what kind of emotions, what kind of thoughts are happening? That it's actually a practice of being mindful of craving, and that craving is impermanent. Right? And this is another thing, like we were talking about before, around being able to ignore your mind. You change your relationship to your mind. After learning to ignore your mind, then you begin to learn to observe it. And actually with a kind of non-attached or non-identified, just watching, okay, there's fear, there's hope, there's lust, oh, there's love, there's a thought of generosity, there's a thought, there's wisdom. You know, sometimes when we get out of the way, there's some good stuff in there too, after we clear away some of the bad habits of mind. So all of Buddhism is a practice. None of it is philosophical. All of it is practical. I really believe that, Siddhartha, the original teacher of Buddhism, he was much more interested in kind of psychological transformation. And so everything that he taught was practical. This is what will show you what's causing suffering in your life. And this is what will help you end suffering. So first we have to see what the causes are, and then we can bring the antidotes. I absolutely feel like all of it is practice-based, action-based.
We hear a lot, in the behavioral health industry, that people have to hit bottom before they can embrace recovery. Do you believe that?
I don't know. I've been told that most of my life too, so I have some conditioning that says, hanging around this field for the last 25 years, that I've been told that. I don't know if that's true or not. What I do see, because I'm also walking in a Buddhist world where half of the community that comes to me are recovering addicts and half are not. And so I also see a lot of people who haven't bottomed out in addiction and haven't even necessarily bottomed out in like major suffering in their life, but they just have a core sense that life could be better. Now, I don't know if that's true for an addict. I don't know if an addict could just have the core sense that life could be better and that this alcoholism is a waste of time, or maybe they do have to bottom out. But I don't know the answer to it. And I actually don't really believe that the people who are saying that that's always true actually know that to be always true. It's a very kind of speculative observation. And then also bottoming out is going to be very personal to each person, what that means. So we do see, the alcoholic who never had any consequences and never had, kept their career and kept their family and just, couldn't stop drinking, and then comes in and gets sober. And so that was their bottom. They didn't have to lose everything, but their bottom was emotional.
John Southworth, who received a Lifetime Achievement Award on Monday from our Heroes in Recovery group, he made a comment in his acceptance speech that he fights against that notion, because he believes that as long as somebody is alive, there's a chance. So you can't risk trying to figure out what that bottom is. Right. You got to keep trying.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but so I don't know about bottom, but there has to be willingness, right? There has to be some willingness, and often there does have to be some core dissatisfaction in order to change. You have to want something else more than what you're getting. And so if that's the bottom that you have, but it's not always that. Absolutely, there are people who are just like, I want happiness more. I want spirituality more. I want to be awake more. I want to be healthy more than I want to stay drunk, more than I want to stay loaded. I'm getting drunk, I'm getting loaded because it takes away the pain, because it gives me some temporary pleasure. But what I really want is happiness. And so sometimes that has to be an ugly, destructive bottom for people, and sometimes it's much less. And sometimes it's just meeting the right person and having some hope The Buddha said, actually, to start the path, the first thing that you need is faith, which is interesting because Buddhism is kind of considered a non-faith-based, like it's a practice, it's an action. But he said, in order to start taking the action, you have to be inspired. You have to have confidence or faith that this will work, or you'll never try it. And so I think for some people, you don't have to hit a full bottom, but you might need to meet someone or have some inspiration to get some hope. Now, I think a lot of addicts, that philosophy, which is until you're completely hopeless, or hope comes from hopelessness, something like that. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's just the right person saying, you don't have to live this way anymore. The right interventionist, the right treatment, the right book, right? You see somebody, you meet somebody, and you say, I know that person used to live the way I live, and they're not doing it anymore. Maybe I don't have to lose everything before I start my recovery process.
We started Heroes in Recovery 3 years ago with the idea that we felt like we needed to be open about sharing our stories. And when we say our stories, it's not just from the addict's perspective, but it's from the family members, even the small business owners who allow their employees to go get help.
Yeah.
And we received early on a fair amount of pushback, and it was all based around this notion of anonymity and secrecy. And we really had to kind of fight through that anonymity is not secrecy. And I wonder, when you first published your book, and then when you published Against the Stream, did you feel any pressure like that?
I did. I have received some criticism for speaking about being a member of 12 Steps. My own sort of loophole in the anonymity thing has been that I almost never mention any specific recovery program, but speak about the 12 steps in the general way. And as we know, there's hundreds of different 12-step programs. So I almost never say I am a member of, but saying that I've participated in the 12-step recovery process, and that's been an important thing to me. Anonymity is not that important personally to me. Of course, I've dedicated my life to putting myself out there, to trying to help people, and to being honest, that some of that motivation has come from being a recovering addict. So yeah, I've gotten some pushback, but it's not something that I'm so concerned with. And I intentionally didn't make anonymity a process in the Refuge Recovery Program. I'm not saying this is an anonymous program. Now, I'm not encouraging people to go out and publicly, say I'm a member of Refuge Recovery. But I'm just sort of skirting it because I understand where all that anonymity came from, in the 1930s when you would maybe be oppressed or judged or, being an addict. It's just not like that anymore as much. I feel like there's much more understanding of addiction and of recovery. And so I personally have been very happy to put myself out there. And because the core message is for all of these heroes that you're doing, and that all of this teaching and recovery stuff, which is that if I can, you can. And if nobody is willing to step out publicly and say, I can, I have, how are we going to carry the message? How are we going to, inspire people? And maybe, what we were talking about before, help people not have to go to the very depths of hopelessness by getting out there and saying, recovery is absolutely possible in this lifetime. Here's the tools, here's the work. Do the work, you will recover.
So to kind of wrap up, you've got a new book coming out in June. Could you tell me the title of it and kind of give me just a kind of a summary of what we can expect?
Sure. The new book is Refuge Recovery. Refuge Recovery follows the traditional Buddhist formulation of the Four Truths of the Eightfold Path. So it's a full treatment plan looking at the cause of the suffering and addiction, its causes, the treatment, the path, mindfulness, compassion, forgiveness, ethical behavior, wisdom. So there's 8 practices. Well, there's more than 8 practices, but the Eightfold Path is all core practical development tools and skills. there's a system within Refuge Recovery to start meetings. And so it's going to be a volunteer-based, peer-based, organic meeting process where people can come together and have Refuge Recovery meetings. There are guided meditations, all of the Refuge Recovery meetings, and we have many of them in Los Angeles, and there's some in Nashville, and there's some in San Francisco and New York. There's some around, but when the book comes out, there's going to be an encouragement for people to start Refuge Recovery meetings. Every meeting has a period of guided meditation. And there's a script of the meditation instructions that I can just hand to you, and then you can lead the meeting in the meditation, because it says, read these 2 lines, pause. Read these 2 lines slowly, pause. 2 minutes of silence. Read these 3 lines, pause. So that you could, even though you don't teach meditation, you could teach the whole group mindfulness meditation because you have the script. And all you have to do is read the script. And so Refuge Recovery has the hope, the book and the movement, and it's a program, it's a recovery program, has the hope of providing Buddhist-based, mindfulness-based teachings to addicts everywhere, and that it will be a peer-based, voluntary-based, non-professional, support group. So the book has all of that. It has the teachings, it has the program. There's all of these inventories to be done. I'm also working on a workbook for it. In addition to that, I'm in the process of starting a number of outpatient treatments and sober livings, which will offer the Refuge Recovery, where people who want to use Refuge Recovery will be able to come, live in the sober living, do the intensive outpatient, Buddhist track, and we'll probably do some professional trainings for therapists that want to implement this into their centers, into their treatment facilities. So it's very exciting, and so it is a book, but it feels like it's much more than a book. That it's actually the book that is the foundation for this movement, for this recovery process using Buddhist principles. I do want to say that, and I think that this is important, I'm not presenting this as solely an alternative to the 12 steps. About 80% of the people who are practicing Refuge Recovery now, and it's been going for about 6 or 7 years now in Los Angeles, still do 12-step work. There are a handful, there's maybe about 20%, I believe, who are taking refuge as their primary recovery path. And my feeling is that that's probably how it will be for a while. Is that I still do 12 steps, and most of the people that are helping me create Refuge still do the 12-step rooms, and then some of them don't. Some of them just have such a difficult time with the Judeo-Christian higher power God language that they really just want the non-theistic Buddhist approach. I'm somebody who can walk in both worlds. Most of us can walk in both worlds. Although, I did create this because Buddhism does make more sense to me. Non-theistic, spiritual, psychological approach makes more sense to me than theism. So, Refuge Recovery, 4 Truths, Eightfold Path, meetings. Also in the book, there's the program, and then there's personal stories. I think there's like about 6 or 7 personal stories of people, of how they've recovered, how Buddhism has helped them in their recovery. And again, most of those are people who are saying, I use the 12 steps and Buddhism in this way. And, 12 steps did this for me, and Buddhism did this for me. And then there's a few stories that say, I couldn't relate to the 12 steps, so I just used Buddhism. I just used Refuge. I just used the 4 Noble Truths. And this is how my recovery has unfolded. And to give people some personal view, like Dave Smith is in the book. He's one of the stories in the book. And in the long term, my intention is also to have an inpatient, to be able to do inpatient treatment where people can come and have this Buddhist community. And I have this vision of a treatment center that's more like a monastery, where people are coming and they're really meditating and they're staying and they're learning to practice in a way that's just not kind of process groups all day, but that's really practice-based. In the pool all day.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the reasons that we've just enjoyed having you come, and that's really the heart of innovations in recovery. And if we are going to embrace this notion of innovation and embrace integrated treatment, we have to be open.
Yeah.
And if we keep doing things the way we're doing them, we're going to keep getting what we're getting.
Yeah.
And the numbers are very stark. 23 million Americans need help. Only 4 million seek it. And we run around patting ourselves in the back that we've helped 4 million,
Right.
but there's 19 million still suffering. Right. So, I applaud your efforts because it's definitely needed.
Yeah, and I hope that Refuge will capture, some more of the millions who aren't, seeking help, that it will inspire, that it will reach out to some of the people that are a little bit more non-theistic minded or Buddhist minded. Yeah.
Great. Hey, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Noah.
pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Happy to be here.